I shot two completely different music videos with the new Laowa Nanomorph zooms. The first de-squeezed horizontally, and the second, vertically. Laowa sent me out this set of lenses for a few weeks, but I don't get to keep them, and Laowa has no impact on what I say in this video, of course. However, this video does have a sponsor, and that is audio. More on them later. Out of the 3 flare options, I had my hands on the amber flare version, which I thought played really nice with the warm practicals that we had on location for this performance video. Flares can be fairly subtle if you're off axis, but if you want to point yourself directly at a light source, you can get that really thin, long streak that goes all the way across your frame. And you can see here I'm shifting my perspective slightly to eliminate that. When I was lighting for the master wide, the most important thing for me was to have a good backlight, because I wanted to have a nice edge on our lead singer with a color temperature that matched the practicals that were in the set. It also gave us a beam of volumetric light when we added some subtle haze to the room. And third, and most importantly, that backlight gave us those tasty flares. I instructed the guitar player on screen left to kind of pace back and forth crossing that backlight so that the flares would pop in and out and kind of give us movement and energy instead of just like having a streak living across the frame the entire time. So by design, that music video had flares galore. The other music video I shot with these lenses, however, had none. We were shooting outside on a fairly overcast day, so even when I shot directly into the sun, peeking through the clouds, we did not have any flares. These lenses are not sensitive enough with their flaring to react in this shooting scenario. And last quick note on the flares, I did notice a kind of weird like vertical flare twice during that first music video.
Looks like a mistake. What is that?
Hey, did you know that 65% of you aren't subscribed to the channel? What are you doing? Help Eric out and subscribe. I don't know the number, but probably there's some truth to that.
I made the unlikely decision to repair what had never been broke.
For the 4x3 video, I used a 1-strength glimmer glass on both lenses because these lenses are plenty sharp and we wanted the video to feel a bit more nostalgic.
Mattered, since I couldn't keep up with the cue. So now when I say break, you all scatter, and then when I pump fake, just act like you're confused.
And it was very easy to add that filtration because there are 77mm threads on each of these lenses. No matte box required. But in that other video, we did not use any filtration. For this performance video, it was kind of a no-brainer to shoot Anamorphic with a traditional horizontal de-squeeze for a few reasons. First, the band wanted this to feel cinematic, and an anamorphic aspect ratio is kind of an easy cheat code for that. Second, I wanted those tasty flares. And third, practically to try to fit everyone in this large ensemble into a wide shot was made a lot easier by having a wider field of view. I really like the framing of the wide shots, and we're not stuck with a bunch of excess headroom like we would be in a 16:9 aspect ratio. I chose to shoot our other music video de-squeezed horizontally with the lens rotated 90 degrees for 2 reasons. The general idea for the video was to have a story unfolding in the background as our lead singer kind of narrates in the foreground, with our primary reference for his character being the host of the Twilight Zone. And the outdated aspect ratio helps elicit that time period. And given the fact that we only had like 7 actors to comprise both of our football teams, I thought it would be a lot easier to fill the frame if we shot in a boxier aspect ratio and avoid having a bunch of boring empty field on the sides of the frame.
And if you're learning the world's smallest fiddle, you've got to practice it in your spare time. You may not.
So practically speaking, I totally could have done this with a spherical lens and just chopped off the sides. But by going the route of a 90-degree rotated anamorphic lens, I'm able to keep the full resolution of the C70 while adding some subtle character to the out of focus areas. And the reason why I was able to make that choice between vertical and horizontal was because I had my hands on the PL version of these lenses. They make them in a bunch of mirrorless mounts, but Laowa sent me the PL version, which meant that now I had to drop a few $100s on a PL to RF adapter. I was going to rent one from my local rental house because I was already putting in an order for some larger frames for these shoots, but when I got the quote back, it was gonna be almost 200 bucks to rent for a week, and that's the majority of the cost of buying one new, so now I have one in my kit. And now that I have that PL to RF adapter, I'm able to mount the lens in 4 different orientations. Far and away, the trickiest thing about shooting with a sideways anamorphic is the monitoring. A lot of cameras do not have a native 1.5 D-squeeze option. My C70 sure doesn't. And my primary external monitor, the OCT7, does have a 1.5 D-squeeze, but it does not let you D-squeeze a fraction. So the whole week before the shoot, I wasn't really entirely confident that I could even pull this effect off, because it just wasn't gonna be possible to set my compositions with a frame that looks like this. So I did some research, and it turns out that there are some monitor options, including small HD on the premium end and port keys on the budget end, that allow you to do a custom D-squeeze option less than 1. So I picked up the BM72 port keys monitor, so I could D-squeeze 0.66 times and monitor my native almost 4:3 aspect ratio. In hindsight, now that I'm reminded of how much I hate port keys menus, I kind of wish I just spent a couple $100 to rent a good small HD monitor for these 2 shoots instead of buying the port keys, but you know, mistakes were made. So before I get to the size and weight and the distortions, I need to thank the sponsor of today's video, Audio. With the exception of those 2 songs in the music videos, all other music in this video, including the track that you're hearing right now, are from Audio. What initially got me interested in Audio is that they offer elements, commonly known as stems. You can download each individual instrument as a standalone track. It unlocks so much potential creativity and gives you so much more flexibility to do things like drop out the drums if you want to emphasize a point like I'm doing right now. When editing with stems, not only do I choose what instruments I want to hear when, I can also choose what audio effects I want on which instruments. Right now I'm going to fade a low pass filter onto the drums, making them feel like they're coming from next door, and then add a flanger effect to this one guitar hit. And then we're going to fade back the EQ of the drums to normal and bring in all the other instruments. If you're interested in checking out their stems, use code SOUND70 for 70% off of a Audio Pro subscription. Thank you, Audio, for sponsoring this portion of the video. Last year, I rented the Nanomorph Primes before the zooms were available, and by far my least favorite thing about those lenses was the significant pincushion distortion, specifically on the 35mm. What's interesting about the way that these lenses are designed is that the pincushion distortion is all but eliminated at the wide end, and only slowly introduced when you zoom in more than halfway on each lens. When shooting these music videos, I never noticed it on set, and even watching back the footage now, it doesn't seem to be apparent at all. But you will definitely see it in lens tests with a stationary camera slowly zooming in. I personally think it was really smart of Laowa to introduce the pincushion at the tight end, because that means we get those straighter lines in the types of shots where you're more likely to notice them. For almost all productions, if I had the choice between renting the primes or the zooms, I would pick the zooms, because they're almost as fast and way more convenient. And it really helped out on this particular music video because we only had like 5 or so hours with all of the actors to get everything, so minimizing lens swaps was critical. All that time we saved not adjusting camera, we could dedicate to sweetening up the lighting. So I mentioned that they're almost as fast as the primes. They are all T2.4 to T2.8. So they are faster slightly, but you also have to look at which lenses are T2.4, because the widest focal length, the 27mm, is a T2.8. And in my opinion, shallow depth of field is way more important at the wider focal lengths. Even if you use like a really cheap, slow f4, 70 to 200, for example, you're gonna have a lot of bokeh, there'll be tons of separation. So if you opt for the primes instead of the zooms because you want a shallower depth of field, you're only really getting it at the focal lengths that are already pretty shallow. And because the pincushion is introduced at the tighter end of these lenses, the wide angle primes are gonna have much worse pincushion distortion. It would be much more tempting for me to use the primes over the zooms if the 27mm, the widest, was a T2, or even a T2.4, but it's not, it's a T2.8, almost identical to the 28mm on the zoom at T2.9. So it makes it kind of a no-brainer for me if I was to rent one of these two. For almost any production, I would choose the zooms. Because although you can get slightly shallower at the telephoto focal lengths, the wide-angle lenses will have nearly identical bokeh, but worse distortion. Plus, it's a little niche and obvious, but you can actually zoom if you want to with these zooms. Not something I typically do, but for a video like this that's kind of quirky and comedic, I thought it would actually work really well to implement that as part of the cinematography.
Yeah, I'll admit it. Piggyback on the world's tallest man.
The last shot of this music video is a reveal that starts in a close-up and ends in a medium wide shot. And to achieve that, we both dollied back and zoomed out. I had one other crew member help me with one of those jobs. I think he zoomed out while I dollied back and racked focus. And the lenses are parfocal, so although it wasn't relevant for this shot because we were moving the camera, if you are zooming on a stationary camera, you don't have to rack focus, which is a pretty huge perk. So although they're advertised as nanomorphs, being nano and lightweight, they definitely don't feel that way to me. I'm sure Laowa is definitely justified in claiming that they are compact, because if you compare them to any other anamorphic zoom, they're going to be like puny in comparison. But I personally think it's much more useful to my audience on YouTube to compare it to other lenses that you are accustomed to using, because let's be honest, people who are using lenses in this price point are not also using those types of lenses. So for example, my 24-105 f2.8, which a lot of people are up in arms about the size and weight of, is nearly identical to this lens. For both the music videos that I shot with the nanomorphs, I either used a tripod, a Dana dolly, or my Easy Rig. So although it's very impressive that Laowa got them down to this size and weight, it's still true that you would never want to shoot them handheld at this size and weight, in my opinion. So in conclusion, could I see myself renting these lenses for another production? Yeah, absolutely. And the types of projects that I could see myself using these lenses on really varies. These lenses are really so versatile, not only because the focal range is very wide, 28 to 100, but the 1.5 squeeze is also really versatile because you can get a 2:3:9:1 aspect ratio or the old-timey 4:3 by mounting vertically, and it's possible to get a 16:9 deliverable without losing too much resolution by cropping off the sides with this 1.5 squeeze. And the look of these lenses is also really versatile. You know, I put filtration on the lenses for one of these shoots and not for the other. These are an interesting Goldilocks lens where you don't get any of that like overtly vintage character while maintaining the three pillars of the anamorphic look.
Make sure to subscribe to Sound It Out Films YouTube.